Hello and welcome to this BioProcess International Ask the Expert webcast. I'm your host, Leah Rosen, the online editor for BioProcess International. Before we get started, just a couple of notes. This webcast is being recorded and will be made available for replay in the multimedia section of our website. We've muted the audio line, but we welcome you to type in your questions for our speakers in the chat window on your screen. After the presentation, we will begin the question and answer portion, and I will ask our speakers your questions from the chat window. Your questions in the chat window will only be visible to myself and our speakers. So thank you for joining us today. It is now my pleasure to introduce our speakers, Michael Frizberg and Eric Langer.
Thank you, Leah, and thanks to BioProcess International for hosting this webinar. I'm Eric Langer. I'm Managing Partner at Bioplant Associates. BioPlan has actually been evaluating the global biopharmaceutical market and life sciences environment for nearly 30 years. But we've also been assessing the China market for over 15 years. And since the first edition of the Advances in Biopharmaceutical Technology in China, which was a co-publication with the Society for Industrial Microbiology and Biotechnology way back in 2006, we've been looking at this market. I can say that in the second edition, which just recently came out, we have been able to assess the trends, the growth, the challenges, the problems, and some of the successes that have occurred in China over the last 15 years. And I can say with some degree of certainty that the 102 authors, the internationally recognized authors, along with the 21 peer reviewers and the 55 chapters in this study, that we have a lot of data and we have a whole lot of information. But what I want to do today right now is to tee up the reasoning and the issues associated with what is really driving the China biopharmaceutical environment today, and that's this. There are 7,500 cancer deaths per day estimated in China right now. There are 12,000 new cases of cancer diagnosed each day in China. 12,000 new cases, 3.8 million incidents of cancer in 2018 alone. These are domestic issues that are driving that industry, but let's put it in a little more perspective. When we look at what's really driving biopharma in the global environment, 290 million Chinese have cardiovascular disease. That's bigger than the adult population of the United States alone. So that is an absolutely massive health problem. So when we talk about biopharmaceutical and we talk about the technology and so forth, we're not talking about a technical problem. We're talking about a health policy issue. And these are some of the things that are truly driving this industry. So let's go back and look at this from another perspective as well. China is to be the #1 retail market this year. China tops the U.S., according to USA Today recently, as the largest retail market. It's growing at 7.5%. But what's the relevance of having a huge middle class? The relevance is disposable income. When you have disposable income and you are able to afford something, you're not going to buy a cell phone if healthcare is an issue. If you need that healthcare, your first expenditure is going to be healthcare. And therefore, as the retail market increases in China, there's a direct correlation to how biotechnology and biopharmaceuticals are going to evolve. So we'll step back another step here, and let's talk about what is today the fact that China represents the global consumer product manufacturing environment. The Chinese have created the Made in China approach, and much of that is essentially evolved into data points like 60% of the world's buttons, 25% of the world's cars, but it's also gone to really significant regulated environments like the major ownership of Chinese high-tech companies in U.S. general aviation aircraft manufacturing. Aircraft are an equally regulated environment, so you can well imagine that there's some overlap in terms of how those industries interrelate. But what it comes down to is today, China represents, according to our database, nearly 8% of the global bioprocessing facilities. That's a rather massive number. So the question then is, when you look at that and you consider the growth, when 15 years ago, when essentially it had very, very few biopharmaceutical facilities at all in China that were other than vaccines manufacturers. What we see today is an emerging environment. So how is that playing out? What we've seen is this is a major issue right now. As many know, that issues associated with quality in China are that's going to continue to be a roadblock. But in our recent analysis, we did a white paper a year ago on China's advances in global biopharmaceutical bioprocessing, a 10-year projection. We asked the Chinese, a number of Chinese biomanufacturers, what they perceive their problems are. What we found was that over 2/3 of the industry in China recognize that China is not prepared for global bioprocess. That's a pretty significant number, and we need to parse out what that means. It means that the manufacturers in China recognize that quality, innovation, scientific expertise, quality systems are not yet in place. So they recognize that in order to become a global producer, they're going to have to address those problems. So this is an environment where you're seeing virtually all of the companies in China seeking, recognizing that they are going to, within the next 6 or 7 years, become a global exporter. That in order to do that, they're going to have to put the quality systems in place. So another issue we asked was by 2026, we found that 86% of China's biopharmaceutical manufacturers expected to be producing for export to the U.S. and Europe, versus only 28% today. In other words, the strategy development is domestic, moving to global. So we see that 28% of the industry in China right now is focusing on the domestic industry, but the recognition is that within a relatively short time frame, that's going to change, and it will be a focus on the U.S. and European market. So I want to start with this question here, or rather finish with this question here. Domestic growth is an engine for global biopharma in China. The old question, which was, can China move from the world's factory for toys, electronics, commodities, into a technologically complex biologic environment? And I would pose that how can China be expected not to advance its healthcare segment? So when we look at the new question, it may possibly more appropriately be phrased, how will developed regions, biopharmaceutical manufacturers, suppliers, and regulators participate in this? In order to address some of these issues and these questions about China's growth and China's future, we have with us today our guest speaker who's got decades of experience in the biopharmaceutical environment in both Europe, the U.S., and in China. I'd like to introduce Michael Frizberg, president of CMAB Biopharma. He will share with us much of his perspective and the expectations of growth and challenges in the Chinese market.
Thanks, Eric, for the introduction. Some very impressive numbers around China and its latest growth, but also certainly some challenges. In the next 20 or so minutes, I'd like to pick up some of the messages we just heard in intro and give you also a bit more background around the latest developments of the pharma market in China, with a focus specifically on biologics and then again on manufacturing. That's the area which is our home. I'll split it in sort of 3 sections. I will start with a brief overview of the China biotech landscape, then the recent changes that opened an opportunity in China for specifically CDMO manufacturing, and also challenges that still remain in doing business in China. In summary and upfront, I like to say that if you're not in China today, you're leaving the world's fastest growing biopharmaceutical market to your competitors. Maybe one more word to my person. I started my career right after university with a job in the fast-moving consumer goods industry as well as toy manufacturing, based out of Hong Kong in 1994. Since then, China certainly came a long way, and I'm still fascinated to see that the traditional core values of Chinese cultures are still reflected in current business practices. But that's a topic maybe for another time. Let's have now a closer look into China. China aspires to become a leading contributor to the global pharmaceutical and biopharmaceutical industry by 2030. At the moment, the biopharmaceutical industry within China is undergoing a period of substantial change. Have you noticed how many people or how many of the goods you buy are actually made in China? Have you also noticed how China moved from a consumer goods manufacturing house to a global technology powerhouse? China claims to own around 40% of the worldwide robotics market by 2019, basically this year. After a successful build-up of the IT and trade environment, with names which are known like Alibaba or Tencent, will be now the healthcare market, specifically biologics, next in line. Let me pause for a short moment here. And before we go further into the biomanufacturing landscape, make a short sidestep to remind us about China's overall healthcare market and a few numbers around it. Around half of the Chinese population still live in rural areas. 20%, and with a growing number, are over 60 years of age. Over 100 million individuals are diabetic in China, with only a third really being correctly treated. You have 4 million plus patients every year newly diagnosed with oncology. Just about 14.6 doctors per 10,000 patients. Overcrowded hospitals, long waiting times. On the other hand, you have around 750 million users of the internet in China, using the internet in China with more than 86% connected with mobile phones. These numbers certainly are a large opportunity for the pharmaceutical market. But to get there, you might think also that a lot of basic infrastructure needs to be established, which could take time. No wonder that China is a very fertile ground for new digital medical solutions. So possible solutions to these challenges are patients in isolated regions can be helped with early-stage telediagnosis, or remote physician consultations and online booking can be done to reduce the overusage of hospitals, of which are certainly still not sufficient enough in the country. Prescription fillings will move more and more to retail or online pharmacies rather than hospital markets. But there are also some basic requirements for this: to form e-partnership with companies who offer remote or mobile diagnostics, doctor and patient communication, remote monitoring, but as well as also the supply chain channels in the background to fill their prescription. In 2018, China was the world's second largest market for pharmaceuticals, worth $137 billion. Larger chemical industry than the US, it accounts for more than 50% of the global API market, produces around 1,600 varieties of APIs, with up to 6,000 pharmaceutical companies, with even more facilities and distributors in place. It's first worldwide in output of bulk APIs such as penicillin and vitamins, just to highlight some of them. Projected to be up to 175 billion by 2022. This is the growth which we will see most likely in the coming years, which China brings to the market. China is long the world supplier of cheap pharmaceutical ingredients and copycat pills, is emerging as a major producer of important new medicines, the biotech drugs. China now also boasts the second largest number of clinical trials involving biological treatments, produced using biological matter such as animal cells or bacteria, after the US. This is also reflected on the investments, with Biopharma being already the second largest area for domestic investments after the IT sector, and the emergence of funds focused on China's biopharma. A few more numbers around this. 90% of China's biopharma is expected to serve both domestic and export markets in around 10 years from now. Also 90% is expected to manufacture to the GMP requirements in the next coming 8 to 10 years. We have already more than 180 facilities in China with close to 1 million liter of capacity. The first launch of a China biotech was 26 years ago, the so-called IFN Alpha 1B, followed then by growth factors, EPOs, invariants, and the more recent targets in everybody's minds are the monoclonal antibodies and fusion proteins. Today there are 3 commercial successes with Yizaipu, Langmu, and Tai Xinzheng. Please excuse my Chinese, but I hope everybody gets the names. 288 antibody therapeutics are actively under development. China is already producing its first biopharmaceutical, which is marketed in the US. It's actually manufactured by a CMO, WuXi Aptec. I'm sure everybody is very familiar with this name. And also on the other side, just to highlight one of the companies, Eli Lilly is planning to start a new cancer drug, which has been discovered only around 7 years ago by a startup in the outskirts of Shanghai, and is derived from ovarian cell Chinese hamster cells. With this short look into the general healthcare and manufacturing market and its recent development, I'd like now to go more specifically into the most recent political and regulatory applications, which clearly motivated us mid-2017 to start up CMAB, a pure-play CDMO. In particular, without going too much in detail, here are a few of the core drivers which are driving the specifically manufacturing landscape. So we have heard about the acceleration of domestic biotech industry and also then the increased international demand. There are the government-backed healthcare and biologics initiatives, an aging population which is increasing, with expected to have around 143 million by 2027, then the Health China Policy 2030, the 13th five-year plan for national economic and social development of the People's Republic of China, where the government has mandated that biotech should exceed around 4% GDP of 2020. A significant deregulation opening the market, just to mention the ICH harmonization, but also the pilot MAH, Market Authorization Holder Program. That's important to know. It removes the need for the originators to manufacture and opens the door to outsourcing. Expiration of key patents strengthening the China biosimilar market. The patents expected to expire in the value of around $17 billion by 2020. Biosimilar developers certainly also looking for cost-saving measures, as this will become a very, very competitive market. Maturation of biologics research and development expertise. There's an increasing number of small, medium-sized companies creating innovative biologics. And also very important, all is driven by talent and a coordinated move of biotech talents coming back to China, bringing decades of experience along from their work experience abroad in the Western markets. And from a pharma company point of view, probably even more important, the backlog of dossiers has been reduced from around 22,000 to less than 5,500 with the implementation of the self-inspections for all IND applications. At the same time, while the average time was around 195 days, it is now only 60 days. And this is due to the increase to staff at the CDE by more than 600 people. But also, there's a priority review now for novel cancer drugs, a pilot orphan drug program, conditional approval based on ex-China data with urgent clinical need. Separate IND CTA approval is no longer required for multi-regional trials. And as mentioned before already, the pilot MHA program expands nationwide, which gives developers the chance to focus their assets and their core activities on R&D rather than on building heavy assets in manufacturing. it on the other side also increases certainly the demand for outsourcing. A study which has been conducted by Bioplant Associates last year among decision makers in the U.S. biomanufacturing landscape showed that China is expected to be the #1 destination for future U.S. outsourcing. This is followed still by the usual suspects, which are listed here, Germany, Ireland, and the other countries. It is interesting to see that pure-play CDMOs still will remain a rarity in China. China CDMOs industry lags behind established international competitors. It's clearly a bit driven that the latest regulatory changes I have given to you a bit earlier only came in the last years, and especially MHA changes are really opening up the market for CDMOs in biologics manufacturing. However, installed capacity is constantly increasing within another 200,000 liter plant in the coming years. And like I mentioned, pure play, you can really only see at the moment 2 or 3 of this list which I've highlighted here. This is only the top players in the current CDMO environment, companies who offer these services. There's certainly a much longer list behind it with less capacities. Upfront Wuxi, the company which we all very well known and which has international reputation, but also this company is not a pure play CDMO. But to highlight here the CDMOs, you might call it 3 as Fujian, Maplex, and clearly also CMAB. That's us as a newcomer on the horizon. In addition to international demand, a strong domestic pipeline is driving demand also for CDMOs. So we have approximately around 400 biologics currently which are in development in China, of which almost 50%, 47%, are novel antibodies, so so-called novel antibodies, monoclonal, bispecifics, ADCs. A good third are biosimilars, followed by fusion proteins, around 6%, and 3% recombinant proteins. It is estimated, also again from a study which has been done earlier this year, that this number is going to be around 700 products in the coming 5 years, potentially even doubling up. But there are also challenges which remain. So coming to my last section, I'd like to share with you challenges which have been addressed by Chinese executives last year who have been asked if they are going to outsource and what are the areas they see which have to be identified and where they see potentially still some critical situations. Clearly, one topic which is in everybody's mind is the IP protection, the need for better protection of IP. Regulatory systems are not transparent and rough. A few changes are still in pilot programs and have to be still established as for the whole nation. You need better law enforcement. You have still cross-cultural management issues working across the different nations, continents, and cultures. Weaknesses in clinical development capabilities, or also in positive way progress in clinical development capabilities, adherence to quality standards, lack of unique tech platforms, but also the lack of experience with international clients, which goes also a bit along with the cross-cultural management issues. Modern CDMOs, especially pure-play service providers, can certainly address these challenges. And just to give you some ideas how these issues can be managed, electronic systems, for example, with the highest level of data protection to address the protection of IP. It is clear that this is not 100% protection, but it goes much further and closer into this direction where we want to be. To be fully compliant with ICH risk management guidelines, be very transparent from the beginning of any project. And also, it's not obligatory currently by regulatory authorities. This already is widely getting implemented and ensures any gaps and risks. GMP standards are met. I think this is a given. This is absolutely important. Committed investors. What is certainly not missing in China, you have strong commercial backing and committed investors supporting the current and future growth. An area which also certainly helps local CDMOs is rapid scalability, immediate availability, and high flexibility. Areas which are not usual in the Western world currently. You have sometimes availability waiting periods between 12 to 24 months. This is where companies in China certainly can point. In terms of experienced teams, talking about also the cross-cultural issues, with a large pool of people having gained their experience outside of China in the Western markets, coming back into China, you have a large pool now which companies can pull from and have a global track record right away. In summary, I gave you a brief overview of the China manufacturing and biotech landscape. It's most recent and still ongoing changes that opens up new opportunities in China. But there are also still challenges which will need to be carefully managed to ensure China reaches its target to become the leading contributor to the global pharmaceutical and biopharmaceutical industry by 2030, as China aspires to be. Clearly, business development in China is no longer optional. In China, the need to connect with global biologics expertise is important. Know-how, the advances in China will affect your business within 5 years. Coming back to what I mentioned in the beginning, if you're not in China today, you're leaving the world's fastest growing biopharmaceutical market to your competitors. We are, at CMAB, are a pure play CDMO and part of a wider network backed up by Seabridge Capital. We can certainly help to position you in China and support you also globally. Just with this last slide, quickly sharing with you our profile. We're located in Suzhou, which is around 90 to 100 kilometers west of Shanghai in China. Certainly we are following the international GMP guidelines and meet the standards of the key regulatory authorities. We've invested more than 100 million in the best modern infrastructure with currently over 180 staff already. Keep in mind, we only started, our business plan only got approved on paper in mid-2017. With international sales offices in Basel, Singapore, Toronto, we are certainly happy and open to take your calls and discuss any further opportunities. With this, and also having shared with you a few interesting data around China and its latest developments, I now like to open up the floor to any questions.
Okay, great. Thanks, Michael. So the first question we have is about clinical trials, and just like, how does the clinical trials process work with Chinese companies? How will they face to their issues in clinical trial centers?
Here's Michael. Let me quickly maybe give one view on it. Eric might be a bit more familiar with the situation around clinical trials, but it's absolutely clear that on the clinical trials there have been issues in the past, and especially I think the question was also related specifically to the clinical trial centers, and here the government has seen and has recognized specifically in last years that a lot of regulations are missing, and it's not sufficient just to increase the speed of reviewing the data. It's also important to organize the clinical trials and the centers according to the Western expectations and to the needs so that you can actually proactively use them also from any other country and compare the data. Eric, do you have here any more specific views on this topic?
Well, actually, we really have been focusing a little further downstream on the bioprocessing side. I know a lot has been written for many years on the clinical trial side. At present, I think that you've hit a number of the key issues.
So, Eric, I think this one is, though, for you. If we take China as an example, what chance do Middle East countries have in the biopharma sector? For example, how can Saudi Arabia benefit from China's experience?
That's a very good question. We put a study together, a quick guide to healthcare and biotechnology in the Middle East, and some time ago, and so we have been studying that area. What we see in the Middle East, of course, that's a very diverse area. One of the key issues, and this has been changing slowly, but things like total per capita expenditure on healthcare in Bahrain is under $1,000 per person. That does not compare particularly attractively to what's going on in U.S. and Europe, especially as the Middle East ages, as some of the things like diabetes, incidence of diabetes rise and so forth. So there is an opportunity there. The question is, how can biotechnology be introduced there, biopharmaceuticals be introduced there when the cost of a therapeutic dose for a biopharmaceutical might range in the $10,000 range, 10 times the typical average expenditure, annual expenditure. So with that kind of disparity, you're dealing with a situation where the demand for things like biosimilars becomes even more acute. And so then the question becomes, how can you introduce a biosimilar when the price of a biosimilar is not that much further south of a reference product? And that's where some of the emerging technologies like single-use technologies, where in-country production of a biologic could make it much more attractive. There are modular facilities being developed by companies, a number of companies, including like Beacon, who have the ability to produce within their clean room facilities, be able to produce in single-use technologies, biologics, particularly biosimilars, that would meet those the domestic needs on a much less expensive level.
Excellent. I think this question is probably a little more directed to Michael. It says, I have heard it is difficult to export biological material out of China. Can you comment?
Can you just repeat, please? Because I didn't catch this question.
Oh, no problem. I have heard that it is difficult to export biological materials out of China. Can you comment?
This used to be the fact that's correct, but also this has improved now. I'm not 100% sure if it's at the moment on a pilot base or if already the regulations are fully established as a common rule. But from the experience which we have currently, bringing it in and out of the country from our own side at CMAB, but also hearing it from other players in this field, it doesn't seem to be an issue anymore.
And what is the key advantage for the Chinese biopharma industry in comparison to established players in countries?
Sure, it's a very good question. So clearly, well, you can see these questions from different angles. First of all, some of the new established players in China are using the latest technology, are brand new, build a lot of capacity. You will find similar situations also in neighboring countries like in Korea, without mentioning here any names, but I'm sure everybody knows who I'm talking about. So you have here young companies with a lot of talent, with expertise, which they've drawn in from Western markets, from Western companies, which are now ready to manufacture and to deliver first-in-class services as a manufacturer. A lot of the established players in the West, as you know, there's loads of them, have had challenges and have still challenges with capacities, have to some extent also different price levels, have different situations from a costing point of view, might not work with the latest technology, just to mention some of these. Clearly, we have to be also fair that Chinese companies also still have to prove and have to build up a track record. There are some players who have very well done this and who are certainly a good example for it.
And I would also chime in that I think also that's a great question. I don't know that there is one advantage. I think it's in a situation, an environment that is evolving in China that is creating opportunities. And some of those opportunities are occurring more rapidly than others. But one of the, as Michael mentioned, the returnees that are bringing that expertise back, that's an exceptional advantage. However, it doesn't necessarily mean that that's going to resolve essentially the upcoming crisis that's probably going to occur in China in the near future. And that is, as the industry grows, it's going to suffer from its own growth. The U.S. market and the European markets are experiencing 50% of the biopharmaceutical companies and facilities in U.S. and Europe are experiencing serious problems with hiring people. In other words, especially in process development upstream and downstream, which is really critical, of course. So when you're talking about an environment that's growing more rapidly, where the expertise and the talent, some of which is being essentially returnees, there's likely to be a gap between where the industry starts to experience that significant upward tick in terms of productivity and the demand for the expertise necessary to produce it. So at some point, if that demand is going to be met by domestic expertise, it means that training is going to have to occur. And that domestic training and education, while that's taking place in a number of universities in China today, one of the big questions is going to be, can you convert university-trained expertise to actual on-the-floor GMP manufacturing competence? And over the years, I think the answer has often been no. You need to have hands-on experience to be able to be, capable of doing the kinds of, highly professional and quality-intensive chores that are required in a biopharmaceutical environment. So I think one of the challenges that China will face is going to be the need to address that growing demand for additional talent.
Michael, do you have any comments on that since you're on the ground at a facility?
Eric knows what he's talking about, and he has done a lot of, very, very in-depth work. So I'm absolutely in agreement that with this tremendous growth which we are at the moment seeing in China, driven up, with new facilities coming up, with new service providers coming up, talent will be and is, like in other countries, the key to success. And it's very important to secure this. And it's already in China, also in some other industries, but also in this specific industry, a topic to secure it and how to secure it. And it's a similar topic, like maybe not yet to the same extent, but it's getting there, where we have the situation in the US or in European markets. Talent is the key. You certainly can build the nicest plants with the best equipment. And in China, you will find them importing all the things which are known and which are used and are best in class. Talents can be imported as much or only this many, but then at the end, you also need to continue building up a pipeline of people to support your growth.
Okay. Yeah, and we did have one question about that as far as the equipment. What is the capability in China of producing the manufacturing equipment needed to process biologics?
Yeah, so at the moment, and then I'll let Eric also talk on it. From my point of view, and also from our point of view, it's it's almost everything is currently imported from the world, from the known international suppliers. There are local equipment manufacturers coming up, and there are local suppliers. Not from our point of view, not everywhere yet to the standard which we would expect, what our customers specifically want to see. So driven also by customer expectations, us as well as all our competitors with who we know and with whom we have contact with, we use the international equipment. And then the next question obviously would come out of it, how do you secure and also then the supply of, if anything breaks, or having the back supply, and typical questions for the experts in the room. There, the international equipment suppliers have recognized that China is the market of the future and start, fortunately, building good supply chains with local manufacturing, or at least of consumables in China. But to this question, it's come most of it from international, from outside.
And Michael, I can absolutely agree with that. When we've spoken with the biopharma facilities in China, they really would prefer to purchase the Western-produced manufacturing equipment. And the reason for that is it's demonstrated that it's going to be capable of producing at GMP quality, and the strategy being, in a near-term strategy, is going to be we're going to be producing at GMP. So if you can demonstrate that the equipment you're buying is going to be acceptable for export at some point, then it's very challenging for a company to make a strategic manufacturing decision. We're going to go with, just because we can't afford it, we're going to go with the less expensive but not demonstrated equipment that might tie them to a manufacturer that doesn't have a demonstrated track record in the West. So that's likely where the desire and the rationale comes from, to seek that Western equipment, obviously. But on the other hand, the availability of capital right now in China is still very tight. So there is essentially a demand for this Western equipment, best in class, but there's not really the available cash capital for that. So what that's done is created an environment that's ripe for high-quality domestic Chinese manufacturers to take that position. So there is a lot of demand and for that, or there's a lot of need for that. Now the demand, i.e., is there money for it? That's not necessarily the case. In fact, at Interfex, I just 2 weeks ago in New York, I saw a Shanghai company that was exhibiting their single-use storage bags for the very first time I've ever seen that. And so I think that what we've seen is essentially, in my mind at least, in my very narrow view here, a watershed moment where next year that company and other companies are likely going to be exploring Interfex and BPI West as well as BPI Europe and Asia as a marketing opportunity. So what I think we're seeing is the tip of the iceberg, and as these companies demonstrate success in China, there's going to be increased interest and at least curiosity in where these companies and their equipment will become, major competitors. Because at the end of the day, it all comes all the way back to what we talked about at the very beginning, which is the domestic market in China for biologics is remarkable, and they recognize it as an opportunity to produce innovative technologies that ultimately will be sold in the West. So we're living in a very dynamic time.
Maybe one last one to this one too. I think just following some of the Q&As which I see here. If you focus only on manufacturing, and if you certainly talk on the disposable, then that's where at the moment I believe everything is, or most of it is imported for the different reasons which Eric has just shared with us. On the classic stainless steel manufacturing, which also exists to some extent, not a lot in China and not so commonly used like in the Western world, there are some local manufacturers which also, and there's local steel used, but that's almost the minority at the moment is in the biomanufacturing world in China.
Just a real jump in on the stainless steel side as well, very quickly. I also understand that there are some unit operations that don't necessarily require like protein A downstream purification skid technology, but like WIFI skids for water for injection production skids. My understanding is that some of the Chinese manufacturers are producing and exporting those for Western sales. So that it could well be that the way this emerges is there's going to be the perhaps earlier product contact technologies that are introduced, waste bags and so forth, that then can move into a media hold bag that can then move into a bioreactor in X years. Same with some of the stainless steel technologies. But again, this is such a slow-moving industry that the question is it going to happen in 2 years or 5 years or in our respective lifetimes? So, but I suspect it will happen.
Okay. So I think that's about all the time we have for questions. If we didn't get to your question, Michael and Eric will be provided with your question, and they can get back to you individually. I did want to take a second to define pure play CDMO versus a CDMO. So a pure play CDMO only manufactures for clients. Is that correct, Michael?
That's absolutely correct. So pure play does not have any other business in the background building or working on their own pipeline of biologics or products to bring into the market. There are a lot of players, and the biggest one in China certainly too, who has not too long ago announced and is very active in building up their own biosimilar pipeline. And this certainly creates then with some companies some potential conflict. So this is one of the key points how pure play is distinguishing or separating and differentiating themselves from other manufacturers.
Okay, excellent. So thank you, Michael, and thank you, Eric.
Thanks, everyone, for listening, too.
Thank you.
And thank you for joining us today. A recorded version of this webcast will be available for on-demand viewing on our website, and as a registered attendee, you'll receive a follow-up email providing you with a direct link. We look forward to having you join us at future BioProcess International Ask the Expert webcasts and more in this BioProcess and China series. So please look for those announcements in your inbox. Bye.